بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بعد محمد وآل محمد صلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Let us begin tonight's program with the recitation of the Holy Quran. Once again, a loud salawat from everyone. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil farajahum.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والشمس وضحاها والقمر إذا تلاها والنهار إذا جلاها والليل إذا يغشاها والسماء وما بناها والأرض وما طحاها ونفس وما سواها فألهمها فجورها وتقواها قد أفلح من زكاها وقد خاب من دساها كذبت ثمود بطغواها إذ انبعث أشقاها فقال لهم رسول الله ناقة الله وسقياها فكذبوه فعقروها فدمدم عليهم ربهم بذنبهم فسواها ولا يخاف عقباها
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. I would now like to request Brother Faizan Jafri to recite a salam with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
कब्र ज़हरा बना रहे हैं अली, कब्र ज़हरा बना रहे हैं अली, अपनी गुर्बत छुपा रहे हैं अली, کیوں کمر جھک گئی ہے مولا کی، کیوں کمر جھک گئی ہے مولا کی، کس کی میت اٹھا رہے ہیں علی، اپنی غربت چھپا رہے ہیں علی، وقت تلقین زخمی شانوں کو، وقت تلقین زخمی شانوں کو، دھیرے دھیرے ہلا رہے ہیں علی، اپنی غربت چھپا رہے ہیں علی، سامنا ہو گیا ہے قنفذ سے، سامنا ہو گیا ہے قنفذ سے، صبر کو آزما رہے ہیں علی، اپنی غربت چھپا رہے ہیں علی، اپنی گردن پہ نیل راسی کا، اپنی گردن پہ نیل راسی کا، بیٹیوں سے چھپا رہے ہیں علی، اپنی غربت چھپا رہے ہیں علی، دیتے جاتے ہیں غسل بی بی کو، دیتے جاتے ہیں غسل بی بی کو، ہچکیاں لیتے جا رہے ہیں علی، اپنی غربت چھپا رہے ہیں علی، اور کیسا غم ہے جو آج چلتے ہوئے، کیسا غم ہے جو آج چلتے ہوئے، لڑکھڑا بار بار لڑکھڑا رہے ہیں علی، اپنی غربت چھپا رہے ہیں علی، کیسی نعمت سے ہو گئے محروم، کیسی نعمت سے ہو گئے محروم، ہاتھ کیوں ملتے جا رہے ہیں علی، اپنی غربت چھپا رہے ہیں علی، قبر زہرا بنا رہے ہیں علی، اپنی غربت چھپا رہے ہیں علی، پر محمد وآل محمد صلوات اللہم صلی علی محمد
صلی علی
آل
محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Jazakallah, brother Faizan, for that beautiful recitation. One more salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Respected Shaykh, everyone who's tuned in, Assalamu alaikum. My condolences to all Mu'mineen on these Ayyam Fatimiyah. Once again, we are honored to host Shaykh Mahdi Shahkolahi from DC. Once again, due to weather-related difficulties, we are holding this event online. Nonetheless, the community is always thrilled to hear you speak, Shaykh. Alhamdulillah. Before I request the Shaykh to begin his speech, I would like to request that we recite a Surah Fatiha for the marhumin of tonight's program sponsors. Let us include all our marhumin and the marhumin of the Ummah. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Alhamdulillah. I would now like to request the Shaykh to please begin with a loud salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ajil faraj.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة على رسول الله وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين وأصحابه المنتجبين سيما بقية الله في الأرضين عجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم كل وليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك توعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا السلام على فاطمة وأبيها وبعلها وبنيها والسر المستودع فيها بعدد ما أحاط به علمك. Dearest brothers and sisters, again I express my condolences first and foremost on this grievous occasion that we commemorate the martyrdom anniversary of Lady Fatima Salamun alayha, to the holy Imam of our time, to the Ahlul Bayt, Amir al-Mu'mineen, to the Holy Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, to all of you lovers and followers of the Ahlul Bayt. May inshallah we be among those that Lady Fatima is pleased with, and of those who follow in the instructions that they have given to be true servants of Allah, inshallah. We were just kind of spending briefly some time going over Surah Al-Muzammil last night. Inshallah, we hope to continue that tonight. Surah Al-Muzammil, as we mentioned, is one of the early surahs, one of the earliest surahs, and we were hoping to use what is being instructed here to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, as a program or regimen for ourselves in construction of a development program that allows us to also create vibrant communities that can kind of stand up to the demands that exist and to work through many of the challenges that, of course, are come hand in hand with taking a step in this rightful direction. And last night we went over the first 4 ayahs where it states, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Ya ayyuhal muzammil, O you wrapped up in the mantle, the Prophet experiencing the fatigues of revelation and taking on the responsibility of this mission. The Quran addresses him that way. O you who feel like you're in a state of fatigue and exhaustion, قُمِ اللَّيْلَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا, stand up, get up, and stand specifically in the nighttime. So be awake at night, engaged in the spiritual program that we're outlining for you, except for a small portion of it that you, of course, require to rest. نِصْفَهُ أَوْ انْقُصْ مِنْهُ قَلِيلًا, half of it, or take from that a little. So again, showing flexibility in the time that you spend as a part of that spiritual program. And in ayah number 4, أَوْ زِدْ عَلَيْهِ, or increase it. وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا, and recite the Quran in a tartil fashion. So we were looking at this in ways that we can also appreciate the regimens that are being instructed to the Prophet. And in the last ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will address this point that it is not just you who is engaging in this program or being directed to engage in this program. We know that others are also accompanying you in this. So we want to make sure that we look at this not as just a divine instruction to the Prophet, but one that is for the establishment of that early community. All right, so we arrived at the second point. First point is that stand up at the nighttime, be awake at the nighttime. And the second instruction that the Prophet is given as a part of this program is وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا, and recite the Quran in a tartil fashion, commonly translated as in a measured tone. So there's a conversation to be had about the meaning of tartil and the purpose of tartil in styles of recitation. So if you're studying ability to read the Quran fluently and engaging maybe in studies of tajweed, tartil will be one of the kind of styles of recitation that you will be trained on. But moving past kind of the style itself, and we have riwayat that speak about how it should be read. Riwayat, Quran should not be recited like you would recite a poem. There's riwayat from Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam. He says, لا تهدوا هذا الشعر. Don't recite it as you would recite poetry, and don't separate them too much for them to become disjointed. So that's kind of a stylistic discussion. But what tartil is as far as a type of recitation and what impact it's supposed to have on a person's spiritual soul is also very important. So beyond kind of reciting it in a measured tone and a consistent tone, it's supposed to be recited. The Prophet is instructed, you're supposed to recite this Quran, whether it's for yourself or whether it's for others, but first yourself, in a way that allows it to penetrate your heart. So that tartil is generally understood by mufassirun, ulama, as being a type of phenomena very close to what we call talqeen. Talqeen is most familiar to us when we are engaging in the funeral ceremonies of an individual before they're put in the grave. In our fiqh, the talqeen is recited. Someone goes and prepares essentially the deceased for the questioning that shall come, and it's almost like a reminding of the basic beliefs that they have. So why are you doing that? Because you want to make sure that in that difficult moment that you're going to be able to remember, you're going to be able to respond appropriately, and especially considering there's so many other factors that are likely to kind of influence your ability to recall and speak accurately to what your beliefs are. It's important to undergo a process like talqeen so a person can kind of gain that confidence. Here again, remember the Prophet and the early Muslim community and early Muslim communities like what we're experiencing, they will come up against a lot of factors that in one respect are new, and beyond that will challenge kind of their ability to remain firm in the convictions that they have and in the way that they kind of verbalize them. So this Quran that the Prophet is being instructed to read, even though it's in the early stages, remember the Quran in its in the fashion of tanzil, that means broken up into different sections, that happens over the lifetime of the Prophet, of his messengerhood. But in our kind of studies of Ulum al-Quran, one of the kind of very strong opinions is that the heart of the Quran, the essence of the Quran, was revealed to the Prophet's soul. Whatever way we look at this, it's saying engage with the Quran as a part of this spiritual program, but make sure your engagement with it is one that allows penetration of these ideas into the heart. So that both in kind of moments of stability and moments of instability, it's so deeply ingrained in who you are as a person, you're going to be able to act in accordance with what you've read and how you've engaged with the Quran. I think that's the real challenge, right? In all the things that we know in life, we are really challenged to be able to reproduce them or act in accordance to them when we are put in difficult situations. Right? I have firm convictions in something, but when I'm put in a position where I'm pressured by others, where I may potentially have to make a compromise on other issues, to what extent do I feel comfortable? To what extent do those ideas kind of are deeply rooted in my soul? So this وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا, saying, oh Prophet, engage with the Quran in a way that you understand it. Now for us, it's important for a few things kind of to be acknowledged when we read a verse like this. One is first the engagement with the Quran, first and foremost, right? We said one of the gems of that spiritual development and spiritual program is the Salatul Layl, the recitation of the, kind of the Nafila prayer at night. And kind of coupled with that is the recitation of the Quran in this tartil fashion. Now, this tartil fashion can be reading, let's say, a page of the Quran, making sure that you go through it, not quickly like you're in a race, but measured, and then making sure that you have an appreciation for what is being said. So if you require a translation, to work through a translation, maybe a very brief tafsir, and then ponder on what's being said. And try to kind of have that conversation with yourself, with your heart, that this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling me. In an instance like this, in the example of such and such tribe, such and such people, such and such prophet, this is what happened. This is how they were responded to. It's important for me to also kind of be wary of that. This is the recitation of Quran in tartil fashion. And when a person approaches their relationship with the Quran in this way, they can kind of feel the longing for that, right? The parallel here is kind of like looking at this spiritual program as you would a kind of physical program when you exercise. If you have a kind of consistent program of exercise, even if it's walking, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes a day, an hour a day, when you don't do it, you feel like something is off. You need it. It's good for you. And if you can have even more aggressive exercises, then it just kind of makes you feel differently. And you look forward to it. You don't dread doing it anymore. Why? Because not only what you're doing is hopefully enjoyable, but you're understanding the benefits that it has for you. Engaging with the Quran and reciting it in a tartil fashion more or less kind of has the same type of effect, and will allow us to then build not a tolerance, but more so a capacity to be able to engage the Quran more regularly, and then increased capacities or amounts. So again, وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا, right? So make sure you take advantage of what you're gaining in the nighttime to be able to add to your program recitation of Quran in tartil fashion. Okay. Now, so it's saying do these two things and to try to kind of prepare yourself to build the ability. Why? إِنَّا سَنُلْقِي عَلَيْكَ قَوْلًا ثَقِيلًا. So we're not just saying this because we want you to grow and develop and it's good for you. No, they're targeted, right? They're purposeful. Aside from building this capacity, existential capacity, this leadership capacity, this messengership capacity, we are soon going to cast on you a qawlan, a discourse, thaqila, it's heavy, right? We know from like hadith, thaqalain or thiqlain, the heavy things, the weighty things. So it's saying, oh Prophet, we're going to put you through this training so you'll be able to bear the weight of this weighty discourse that's going to be coming down, and you're going to receive it soon. So again, like we said, the Quranic principle, the divine principle is that God does not task any individual beyond their capacity. So here the Prophet is of a high capacity, and the Quran is instructing the Prophet to extend his capacity because of a weighty discourse that shall soon be brought down. So in our parallels, what this weighty discourse is, we can't do a full tafsir. Some people say it's the content of the Quran that shall come down throughout the 23 years that the Prophet is enjoying this messengerhood. Some people are saying the ability to bear the meanings of the Quran in one's heart. Other mufassirun say, the ability to take on the responsibility of spreading the truth and resisting against the challenges of the deniers, the troublemakers, and also sometimes in more specialized tafsir, kind of speaking to this concept of wilaya. But beyond that, for us, again, saying this spiritual program is purposeful because you will soon be challenged with a weighty discourse. So in our lives, personally, as we kind of go through those basic trainings, preparations for what is to come in even our day-to-day affairs, that itself is kind of a weighty discourse enough. Life is difficult enough that it requires us to have the capacity to then make smart decisions, and then be able to come out the other side with as little regret as we can, and to be able to cling on to the support of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when you're looking at kind of institutional development, you're looking at community development, all of those things are amplified, right? Like we mentioned in kind of discussions of years past. When you're dealing with one person, me and myself, I'm challenged. There's so many things that in my mind, I'm telling myself this is right, I should do, but in my character, in my will, it's weak, and I end up not doing that. So there's a constant struggle there. Now imagine if you make one person two, like in a couple. You make that four, like a family, and then all of a sudden you have 50 people, you have 100 people, you have hundreds of people. That's a weighty discourse. It's a very heavy responsibility to be able to kind of tread a path that keeps us honest to what our Islamic ideals are, and then to be able to work through the growing pains of a community. So I offer this as a kind of a personal reflection observation. Communities that are successful are ones that kind of have put in some work before kind of even that first day, before they turn the key to the first building, the first program, the first set of community-wide activities. There's a preparation that has gone there. Because if a person wants to engage in exercise, and they want to go play soccer, they don't warm up, and beyond not warming up, they're not in great shape, the likelihood of you injuring yourself or injuring someone else or not being able to perform well is very high. And a lot of times our kind of imaginations of how we construct our communities are very much without an appreciation that there needs to be ample preparation. And this is not something that we can do kind of willy-nilly. It really requires a strategic planning and a preparedness amongst the individuals, or at least kind of like the core, to be able to support the larger group in their moments of difficulty and as they kind of work through their issues. If you do not have that, then you more or less will become overwhelmed by the burden of being able to lead a community successfully. Now, alhamdulillah, again, from the observations that I've had of this community, there's an appreciation for kind of a wide spectrum of things that need to be done. And not only are they short-term, they're kind of long-term too, and intermediate term. So these are important things. But building the preparedness is also an important prerequisite to that. And I think that's lost on unfortunately, kind of many of us within the realm of community work and community development, right? So this is going to present itself in a lot of different ways. So you have the basic spirituality that is shared amongst everyone. It is not just to say in the construction of a successful, strong community, you need to get one or a few very spiritual people, kind of put them at the center and let them kind of be the lifeblood of all spirituality that permeates. No, that's not enough. Right? It's not to just get one individual who's like, okay, you're doing the Qiyamul Layl, you're doing the Rattil al-Quran tartila, you come over here and you bear the burden of Inna sanulqi alayka qawlan thaqila. That cannot happen. So every individual has to partake, has to kind of has to agree to the fact that this is a necessity. And then in the construction of a balanced and a robust community or institution, it's important for then us to undergo the necessary preparedness in the contributions that we're going to make. Now here it's specifically looking at the Prophet delivering his message. So he has to undergo certain spiritual practices. But let's say my role is going to be the role of a strategic planner. My role is going to be the role of like a project manager. My role is going to be the role of curriculum developer. My role is going to be the role of technology. Whatever it is, there needs to be kind of like a preparedness and appreciation, because as you engage in kind of establishing and then scaling your activities, each of these will represent their own qawlan thaqila, right? So we have to be prepared to take on that challenge. Okay, now so the Prophet is told, قُمِ اللَّيْلَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا, get up at nighttime. Why? Next ayah, إِنَّ نَاشِئَةَ اللَّيْلِ هِيَ أَشَدُّ وَطْئًا وَأَقْوَى مُقِيلًا. Why? It's saying the time that you'll spend at night. نَاشِئَةَ اللَّيْل. Nashia means like an activity, an event. So this event that you're doing at night, so the core instance of that is the night prayers, right? Salatul Layl, or the recitation of the Quran, tartil. So that act in the nighttime, ashaddu wat'an, hiya ashaddu wat'an. So it's more firm, it's stronger in its what means to take steps, to engage in an agreement, to tread a path. So this activity that you perform at night is more effective in your spiritual development. So it's saying it's a better way of being able to develop preparedness. There's so many other things that you can do, but nothing is effective as this. Again, speaking to that basic point of this being a gem of a practice, of an exercise for one's spiritual development. So Allah's saying, yeah, there are other things you can do. You can do things in the daytime, so you can more or less dedicate the nighttime to rest. But we're telling you that you're never going to get the results that you get through activities like this. And again, like it's a very profound point, because I think it speaks to a lot of the struggles that we have in our lives, that the Quran is saying one thing, the Deen is saying one thing, of course, taking into consideration all the variety of interpretations and the possibility of meaning, all those things, kind of taking that for granted. A lot of times the Deen is telling us something, the Quran is telling us something, and there are alternatives that exist in the development of kind of the human experience, right? But what the Quran is saying in this instance, at least, and I think in many occasions we can extend that to the instructions that are given, is that these are more effective than the alternatives that you have, right? You want to achieve justice? These are the ways to go about establishing justice in larger society. You want to be able to kind of correct a disagreement. You want to be able to strengthen a relationship. You want to be, whatever it is. The Quran gives certain instructions, and then larger human experience in society, in our advancements of sciences, and our larger body of knowledge, there are all alternatives to that. But the Quran is saying this is a better one. So the identification and then the appreciation of those against the spectrum of other things that exist is really part and parcel of what's being said here to the Prophet. It is not that you can, it's not possible to build a spiritual preparedness through other things. It's just, this is the one that we have designated for you because it's the best one. So in our abilities to build community and scale community that are vibrant, the Quran has, and the Deen as a whole has a kind of a method. And there may be parallel methods that also allow us to build and develop, but they will not be as rich and robust as what the Quran is saying. They will not be as effective. Okay, وَأَقْوَمُ قِيلًا, and it's more upright in respect to speech. Again, beyond that, beyond the fact that this is the most effective way that you can achieve this preparedness and expand your capacity, beyond that, إِنَّ لَكَ فِي النَّهَارِ سَبْحًا طَوِيلًا. Okay? In the daytime, you're busy. So you have drawn out affairs. سَبْحًا طَوِيلًا. Okay? So it's not just that you're a poor time manager and you will not get around to performing these things. Some of that is obviously true. In my case, I definitely have time to spend 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes reading the Quran a day. For sure I can make that time. But my failure to do that is largely due to my poor time management. But the Quran is telling the Prophet, beyond kind of this ability to make time for it, you're busy. The things that your kind of engagements that you have right now may not always allow you to engage in these spiritual practices in ways that you feel is satisfactory, right? When you're really grinding, you almost feel like there's no time for anything, right? It's just one thing after the other. There's so much on your plate that you're trying to get through them as best as you can, and it almost feels like it's never ending. And what happens? You have to make sacrifices there to ensure that you maintain some semblance of balance, or at least of productivity. Otherwise, you'll become overwhelmed and you'll fail. So the Prophet is being told, essentially, in kind of in our words, you're grinding in the daytime. You may find a moment here or there, one day here, one day there, but it's not going to be consistent. And because of that, we don't want you to be put in a position where you have to choose between one and the other. You may be busy at work, you may be busy with family, some other thing could happen. Your car could break down. There are no cars in, but tantamount to your car could break down. The weather could get bad. There's so many variables there that could potentially disrupt your ability to kind of engage in that spiritual program. So acknowledging the fact that you're busy is also an important reality. It's not the Quran is only saying, oh, you should find time. Why? You should be looking at priorities. If you don't do that, then there's something wrong with you. It means you're not committed. That's not how it's speaking to the Prophet. Interestingly, I know a lot of times there are other things that kind of maybe resemble that language, but here the Prophet's not being told, instead of working, if you don't like pray, for 2 hours, then you don't love God, you don't care about God. No, that's not what's being said. You're in a certain position right now in your life that you will likely not be able to engage in these types of activities and give it its kind of due time and its due respect. So make sure that you create time for that in a space, in a time, in a context that will allow you to fully engage. Right? I sit down, I read Quran, 3 minutes later, I'm thinking about an idea, I get a phone call. Or I receive a message. And I'm not regimented enough. I turn my attention away. I lose the ability to engage with the Quran, with the prayer that I'm reciting. So here, again, it's telling the Prophet, we understand the challenges that you're going through. We want to make sure that we work around that. And again, for us, there's a lesson here. We may not be able to do the things kind of in the best, proper, ideal ways. That's okay. There should always be an appreciation for a kind of a workaround, a stand-in that allows us to, as best as we can, kind of secure what that need is, even if it doesn't happen in those kind of traditional ways. And there's so many examples to speak to, but I just wanted to more so provide this coverage of the surah, more or less for us to just engage with the surah and think about these kind of questions and what examples that we can come up with. So, inna laka fi an-nahari sabhan tawila. Surely during the day you have drawn out engagements. You're busy. Okay. وَاذْكُرِ اسْمَ رَبِّكَ وَتَبَتَّلْ إِلَيْهِ تَبْتِيلًا. Ayah 8. So, dhikr. So, remember. So, celebrate the name of your Lord and dedicate yourself to your Lord with a total dedication. There's been a lot of discussion about dhikr. Well, alhamdulillah, very well informed of what dhikr is and what dhikr is not, the different types of dhikr. Really, again, it's making it a part of your consciousness. Part of the activities, you're going to need that. You're going to need to feel the presence of God, the kind of companionship of God throughout this journey. God needs to remain present throughout that. And again, in our struggles, communal struggles, a lot of time God is not in the picture at all. There are a lot of maybe rituals that we do that are somehow kind of are supposed to orient us to God, but many times with the absence of God, the presence of other things like the ego kind of replace them. So the dhikr, not just in the recitation on the tongue, but also kind of like presence in the heart, is an important guarantee that when you're kind of engaging these types of behavior, that you can fall back on that. So the effects of dhikr are really a peace of mind and a peace of heart, right? Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub. These are really hard. These are really important for those difficult times, for the really difficult moments where things don't seem to be working out, to be able to fall back on the remembrance of God, to bring some peace and some tranquility, to continue on that path, to continue to push forward is just invaluable. And if we find ourselves, kind of losing that hope and losing the kind of that the optimism for us to be able to succeed in some of the things that we're doing, perhaps there's an opportunity to kind of look at where dhikr plays that role and where the presence of God is in those. And then in the dedication part, it's saying fully dedicate yourself to your Lord. Tabattal ilayhi tabtila. So as best as you can, try not to use God as an option or as an outlet amongst other outlets. For this to work best, for you to actually be in that relationship of total servitude, you need to be all in. You need to go all in. Now, again, like we said, because we're training, we're developing, we are not capable of bearing the weight of someone who gives a full dedication in practice, but at least conceptually, that needs to be there, right? So this kind of the all-encompassing nature of reliance on God in the activities that we perform and in the strategizing that we have is really, really important. God should not only be kind of privy to a sliver of some of the things that we're doing. No, it needs to be front and center in all things that are done and allow us to make that dedication to God absolute. Again, in times of compromise, in times of difficulty, things like this become challenge, right? Because we may start thinking in very utilitarian terms, this kind of greater good idea, and those are very nuanced, complex conversations. But if this tabattal ilayhi tabtila is not even part of a conversation, it's very easy for a person to say, well, society demands this, so we need to make these sacrifices or these compromises. It's not even, we don't even enter that realm of being able to grapple with this notion of this is what the Quranic ideal seems to be, and this is what society is tasking us with. How can we kind of work through that versus, well, this is what kind of the requirements of the time. And a lot of religious institutions kind of fall prey to that because this tabattal ilayhi tabtila was never kind of a part of the philosophy of those institutions. Okay, so what does tabattul look like? Tabattul, of course, total dedication. You all have plenty of examples in your day-to-day lives, but it's really feeling not just the presence of God, but kind of owning up to the fact that you are pulling your trust fully in the hands of God. All right. رب المشرق والمغرب لا إله إلا هو فاتخذه وكيلا. Okay, so if you want to do this tabattal ilayhi tabtila, you want to dedicate yourself to your Lord fully, know that your Lord is the Lord of the East and the West. Right? So he is, incomparable to any of these other individuals or any of these other sources of power and inspiration. Is totally on a different level. This is who your Lord is. La ilaha illahu, there's no God save he. Fattakhidhu wakila, so take him as a wakil. Wakil, you can say, is a trustee. You can say as wakil generally understand to when you entrust something to someone, right? But seeing God as kind of like this absolute caretaker, that all the affairs are entrusted to God. And there's a very kind of long discourse in the Quran about tawakkul, doing tawakkul, what tawakkul looks like. But again, if you're going to be all in, you're going to do this tabattal ilayhi tabtila, then the requirement of something like that is that you really do take God to be your trustee and the caretaker in all of your issues, right? So a lot of times they use the example of a representative in a legal sense, right? An attorney. This person is so well versed in the law that when you have a legal issue, you're trusting in their judgment and their ability to analyze the law and then present a plan of action that best serves your interest. So in kind of larger life, by doing tawakkul, we're acknowledging the fact that Allah not only knows the law of life very well, he is the creator of the law, right? He is the source of the law. Then for us to take him as our representative and to adopt him as someone who serves as a guide and a caretaker for us, looking at it in those terms, it's so matter of fact. Yet in real life, it's not that simple, right? Because you have so many different people and voices kind of pulling in directions of being able to give you some type of assurance that if you do this, then you're going to arrive at such a conclusion. But compared to God, all of those are nothing. So even if we want to create a hierarchy of sorts, at the very least, there needs to be this acknowledgement of absolute reliance, and also a practice of that. And then if there is a kind of a secondary reliance through God to another individual, another idea, another path, then at the very least, there needs to be some peace of mind that they're not in conflict. Right? So taking Allah as wakil in the decisions that we make in all facets of life requires to appreciate what it is that God has instructed through us, through the Quran, through the Sharia, through the Hadith, but also how do they kind of mesh with our other options and our kind of the established practices in larger society. What are those societal norms, and how are they in relationship with what the divine instruction is? These are all day-to-day challenges that we have. The Quran says, sleep this way and at this time. We say, no, we're going to do another way. Or, science is telling us another way. Quran says, to regulate your relationships in this way. We decide for, whatever reasons to do it differently. Quran says, establish your families these ways, to raise your children these ways, to focus on your education in this way, to contribute to society in the form of some sort of output career this way. So all of those things need to be acknowledged and appreciated. And then to do tawakkul is to try to find the instance that best kind of matches what the divine instruction is. And it's not a simple thing, but like I said, beyond actually looking at specific examples, it's really a mindset. It's a mindset of saying, is God playing the role of being the caretaker and the trustee in our lives? And if that's the case, what does he have to say about these different facets of our lives? Okay, now the surah shifts gears and it begins to speak about some of the criticisms that the Prophet's going to receive. So I'm going to try to move through these as quickly as possible and then kind of spend a little bit of time on the last ayah as the Quran kind of gives final instructions on this topic, just with the salawat ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
Okay, so wasbir ala ma yaqulun. Practice patience and perseverance over what they say. Wahjurhum hajran jamila. And distance yourself from them in a graceful manner. And so all these things that we're telling you about building capacity, about preparedness, it's because you're going to face these challenges. So as you set foot in trying to live your life this way and maybe encourage others to do so, you're going to experience this resistance. Now again, you know the history, you know the seerah, so you know examples time and time again of how the Prophet in his public proclamations of the religion, of the revelation, of invitation to Islam, again, in his early life and even sustained throughout his life, there's so much the Prophet dealt with. So, wasbir ala ma yaqulun, kind of be patient and persevere against what they say. There was a whole host of things that were being said to the Prophet, right? So some of them were kind of statements that were directed directly to the Prophet. That means it's kind of like an ad hominem. It's an attack on his individual personality. So it's putting him down, it's mocking him, it's ridiculing him, it's trying to kind of like harass him. All of that really is in the realm of, in one respect, psychological warfare, right? So they're going to engage with you in psychological warfare. And this doesn't have to be as direct as these personal attacks. They could be warfare in that, well, the choices that you're making are poor choices. This is what everyone else is doing, and now you're kind of going against the grain. You're ill-advised. You shouldn't be doing that. You're not going to be successful if you do that, right? So all of these are the same sort of rhetoric that the Prophet was hearing. Now, again, like I said, some of it was directed at him, his individual, but some of it was to the larger kind of message that he was sharing, right? To try and engage in this sort of psychological warfare. So you have character assassination on one side, and then you have kind of the attacks on the content of what's being shared. And again, like I said, in these practices of establishing community, you have all these things. Now, granted, you would hope internally you're not experiencing much of this, but you could have kind of external agents that don't fully understand what you're doing, or if they do, they're threatened by it, they don't want you to succeed. Then sure, you're going to have wasbir ala ma yaqulun. But unfortunately, a lot of times we have kind of internally, because of difference of opinion, artistic differences, strategic differences, whatever we want to call them. Sometimes we have that too, and it creates a toxic environment that requires the more spiritually prepared and the more kind of spiritually the stronger spiritual individuals to exercise this notion of patience and perseverance, right? Because the objective is not just the person, it's not just, you know, my character, it's what we're trying to achieve as a collective. So sometimes, unfortunately, it requires an individual or individuals to work through some of these issues. Much of them in internal conflicts stem from ignorance, misunderstanding, assumptions, and then sometimes it's just the problem of the ego, right? Jealousy, all these things. So that's a requirement. If you don't have at least the core of individuals who are, have some sort of spiritual capacity, and I don't want to use thick skin to say that it shouldn't matter what other people say. It's important. It matters. That's why the Quran is acknowledging it. وَاصْبِرْ عَلَى مَا يَقُولُونَ. We're acknowledging that they're saying these things about you, right? They're calling you a liar. They're calling you a magician. They're calling you a poet. They're calling you crazy. They're calling you possessed. They're calling you all sorts of things of low class. You know, all these things are being said about you. But it's important for you to kind of work through that and look past that for the larger objective. Now, if there isn't a clearly defined larger objective, then the moment you get these personal attacks, it's just not worth it. The person's going to be like, you know, I don't want to have anything to do with this, because obviously we have a toxic environment, and I don't want to work in a toxic environment, right? So all of these kind of dynamics that are very much, you know, they're palpable in the formation and in the growth of our community structures, if we want to call them. They're there, and these preparedness allow us to more successfully work through them. And then the second part of it, وَهْجُرْهُمْ هَجْرًا جَمِيلًا, and distance yourself from them in a graceful manner, right? So how can you distance yourself from a graceful manner? Well, one way to distance is kind of like the eye for an eye law, and it's presented in the Quran to Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 45. وَكَتَبْنَا عَلَيْهِمْ فِيهَا أَنَّ النَّفْسَ بِالنَّفْسِ وَالْعَيْنَ بِالْعَيْنِ وَالْأَنْفَ بِالْأَنْفِ. Okay, we prescribe for them a life for a life, an eye for an eye, nose for nose, ear for an ear, tooth for a tooth. That's one approach to take. And you can do that. You may not be kind of at fault, you may be justified to do that, but remember, it's unlikely to create a tolerant community, right? It's going to create a core of individuals that remain committed, and also, I want to kind of say, like, infallible, right? So if I make a mistake and I attack because of lack of knowledge, misunderstanding, jealousy, my ego, and it kind of like a servant of the community, and now this person distances themselves from me and says, you know what, Brother Mahdi, you know, we'd like to ask you to not come anymore, or if you do come, we're not going to tolerate any sort of it. So I may end up just getting up and leaving and not associating with that organization anymore, or in some cases creating my own organization. The goal is not to say, well, the way we operate is like this, and it's only like this, and this is our flavor, this is our approach, and we're not open to anyone or anything else. In the bigger picture, you want to be able to accommodate a diversity of not just approaches, but a diversity even of spiritual levels, right? As we mentioned very briefly last night, that Mu'mineen are at different levels of Iman. One person can be at level 9, really wants to get things done, push things forward, spiritually prepared, thick skin. And someone like myself, spiritual level 1, first instance that I see something that doesn't kind of make sense in my way of looking at the world, I'm critical, you know, I raise my voice, I create a mess, I backbite. Those are all obviously all problematic. But in the best case scenario, I would hope that there's also a space for a person like me within the community, right? That allows me to grow so long as I'm committed to that growth myself and not have to be kind of kicked out because I'm not able to fully appreciate where the community is right now. So this Hajran Jamila allows for the possibility of reconciliation, the possibility of return, the possibility of appreciating a person's mistake at a later time, right? I may not be able to see it in the moment, but with the passage of time, with conversations that I may have, with reflection, with repentance, whatever I may come to the ills of my way, the mistake that I made, the short-sightedness that I had. So the Hajran Jamila allows for that, and that is the prophetic way. The prophetic way is to leave those lines of communication open, leave the door open whenever a person has that change of heart and is ready to be supported and guided and to tread that path. Always kind of like, we're ready for you. And in a couple of ayahs, it's going to speak about the example of Fir'aun. Again, Musa alayhi salam and Harun alayhi salam, they're instructed, go to Fir'aun, فَقُولُوا قَوْلًا لَيِّنًا, speak calmly to him, speak gently with him, ask him if he wants to change his ways. Even to that extent, there needs to be an openness, a space for people to be able to kind of jump right back in, even though they had previously made a mistake. And who bigger than a person or personality like a Fir'aun? Okay, you all know better than I what a graceful distancing looked like. Famous lines of poetry attributed to Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam. He says, وَلَقَدْ أَمُرُّ عَلَيَّ اللَّئِيمْ يَسُبُّنِي فَمَضَيْتُ ثَمَّةَ قُلْتُ مَا يَعْنِينِي. So I was passing by a lowly individual, a person of low moral character, who was cursing at me, because of the situation that was created by the Umayyads, Muawiyah and his forces. They were creating this kind of environment of dissent against the Imam. So he said, I passed by a person who's a low moral character, he's cursing at me. I calmly pass by them, and I say to myself, he wasn't talking about me. He wasn't speaking to me. He was referring to some other person. He was referring to some other Ali. Graceful distancing, a person has that within themselves, the ability to do that. And the prophetic life is full of those examples. Okay. Now, واصبر على ما يقولون واهجرهم هجرا جميلا وذرني والمكذبين أولي النعمة. So you're going to get multiple layers of resistance, right? So you're going to have stuff that you can definitely you can work through, you can manage. But there's going to be individuals who are so hard-headed and are so committed to their destruction of what you're doing, the antagonism of what you're doing, that you have to more or less leave them to me. وَذَرْنِي, and leave them to me to deal with وَالْمُكَذِّبِينَ, the deniers, أُولِي النِّعْمَةِ, who are opulent, who are well-to-do, who are the powerful in society, the wealthy in society. وَمَهِّلْهُمْ قَلِيلًا, and give them a little respite, give them a little time. Now, this is again another well-established theme in the Quran. Those who are the strongest of critics and enemies of all prophets are generally the powerful, well-established, wealthy in society, right? The high class. Because they have that sense of privilege and superiority and authority that comes with their power, right? And so because of that, why should they lower themselves to listen to another person, especially when that individual or that movement is saying something that is challenging their status quo, right? It's unlikely to find people in positions of power, positions of influence, positions like, let's say, in the government, in Wall Street, that will come and support reforms that will throw, a wrench into their way of doing things. That means to work to their loss. It's just not going to happen. No politician is going to pass a law that doesn't serve their bottom line. That's just the way the political system is set up here. So to have that expectation is many a times difficult to hold. But beyond that, Allah is saying there's going to be certain instances where you're not going to be able to change these individuals. You're not going to be able to, you're not going to be able to, fully succeed over them maybe in the short term. These are people that that have to be left with me. And the reason why that's the case is because, again, the Quranic Sunnah, the Sunnah of Allah, is to make an example out of these individuals in due time to try and drive the message home to the larger population that the outcome of this sort of practice is this, right? So it has to be so severe. It has to be so destructive and humiliating that a person is without a doubt deterred from being able to follow this type of practice. Now, again, this is a complex conversation of when does that happen? Why does it happen in this life? Does it happen in the hereafter? How is that supposed to be a deterrent if it's kind of much of it remains exclusive to the hereafter? This conversation, inshallah, we can have at another time. But again, it's just to say you shouldn't feel the need to take on all of these levels of challenge and criticism and enmity. Much of that will be left for us. You just continue on what you're doing. Give time. Those kind of things will kind of fall into place. In the case of the Prophet, you had the wealthy, powerful Quraysh in Mecca, and you have the Fath of Mecca. Right? Inna fatahna laka fathan mubina. You totally come in without having to really shed any blood. You come and take over. So we'll provide you those moments, but immediately you cannot expect to have a fatah like that, a victory like that. We'll leave that to us. Okay. So وَذَرْنِي وَالْمُكَذَّبِينَ أُولِي النِّعْمَةِ وَمَهِّلْهُمْ قَلِيلًا إِنَّ لَدَيْنَا أَنْكَالًا وَجَحِيمًا. Why? These individuals are so set in their ways. With us, that means we possess ankalan, heavy fetters. Nukul means a person when they're unable to do something, when they're weak, right? Ankal, when a person's chained up, they're unable to move, or their ability to move is restricted. So here it's saying this, وَذَرْنِي وَالْمُكَذَّبِينَ أُولِي النِّعْمَةِ, those who were the deniers of, and they were opulent, these people enjoyed freedoms, and they used those to kind of to struggle against you, to fight against you. So now we will kind of repay that freedom that they had with an example of ankal, chain them up. وَجَحِيمًا, and a fierce fire. وَطَعَامًا ذَا غُصَّةٍ وَعَذَابًا أَلِيمًا, the next ayah. And with a food that chokes those who eat it, and a painful punishment that's prepared for them. So again here, the Quran is kind of painting this imagery of these people were free, we will restrict their freedoms. We'll put them in chains. These people were enjoying kind of like the best and most succulent of foods. We will feed them something that will cause them to choke. And we have this kind of a theme in the Quran and other places too in Surah Al-Ghashiyah, right? It says, تُسْقَى مِنْ عَيْنٍ آنِيَةٍ, they are made to drink from a boiling spring. لَيْسَ لَهُمْ طَعَامٌ إِلَّا مِنْ ضَرِيعٍ, there's not for them any food except ضَرِيعٍ, cactus. لَا يُسْمِنُ وَلَا يُغْنِي مِنْ جُوعٍ, and they will neither be nourished by what they eat or drink, nor will they be satiated in their hunger. So again, it's showing that though they enjoyed these positions, we will make sure that those same things that brought them enjoyment, brought them status, brought them power and authority, we will kind of inverse that for them to engage in similar practices, but it has the opposite effect. All right, next ayah. يَوْمَ تَرْجُفُ الْأَرْضُ وَالْجِبَالُ وَكَانَتِ الْجِبَالُ كَثِيبًا مَهِيلًا, the day when the earth and the mountains will quake, and the mountains will be like dunes of shifting sand. It's speaking about what we call the ashratu sa'a, the signs of judgment, right? There are certain physical events that'll happen kind of like leading up to the larger judgment for all individuals. So it's kind of characterizing that when that day comes, none of their abilities, none of their wealth, none of their power is going to be able to avail them. The whole, all of creation as we know it will be destroyed violently. إِنَّا أَرْسَلْنَا إِلَيْكُمْ رَسُولًا شَاهِدًا عَلَيْكُمْ كَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا إِلَى فِرْعَوْنَ رَسُولًا. We have sent to you an apostle, speaking to the people now. We sent to you a messenger that is a witness to you, or a witness over you, just as we sent an apostle or messenger to Fir'aun. So he's saying, you know this story well, right? People of Mecca, you know kind of what the story of Musa and Fir'aun is. So you know what the outcome of that is. Just like we sent Musa to Fir'aun, we were sending this prophet to you all. فَعَسَى فِرْعَوْنُ الرَّسُولِ, in the next ayah. So Fir'aun disobeyed. Isyan means to exceed the boundary of something. He disobeyed the messenger. فَأَخَذْنَاهُ أَخْذًا وَبِيلًا. So we seized him with a terrible seizing. All right, so that was the outcome of Fir'aun. So even you have a very well-established institution like Fir'aun, that will be fully destroyed in the example of sending of Musa, and so too will be the case with this Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. All right, just a couple ayahs, inshallah, we're going to finish. فَكَيْفَ تَتَّقُونَ إِن كَفَرْتُمْ يَوْمًا يَجْعَلُ الْوِلْدَانَ شِيبًا. So you, disbelievers, how are you going to protect yourselves when a day comes that even the children will become white-headed? Which means, well, like, look, my hair is not fully white yet, but as I age, it does. So it's saying a day will come that even the children, it'll be so overwhelming for them that even their hair will turn white. So what are you going to do on that moment when you've chosen to disbelieve throughout your life? Nothing. السماء منفطر به, wherein the sky will be rent apart. Again, the أشراط الساعة كان وعده مفعولا. The promise that God made is bound to happen. That will be fulfilled. And finally, إن هذه تذكرة. This is a reminder. فَمَنْ شَاءَ اتَّخَذَ إِلَى رَبِّهِ سَبِيلًا. So whoever wants to follow in the path of their Lord, let them do so. So it's showing obviously two clear paths of journeying. And in the final ayah, that's many lines long again, I'll just brief translation and a few points, inshallah, and we'll cite the Rosa. It says, إِنَّ رَبَّكَ يَعْلَمُ, turning kind of the attention back to the Prophet. إِنَّ رَبَّكَ يَعْلَمُ أَنَّكَ تَقُومُ أَدْنَى مِنْ ثُلُثَيِ اللَّيْلِ وَنِصْفَهُ وَثُلُثَهُ وَطَائِفَةٌ مِنَ الَّذِينَ مَعَكَ. So certainly, O Prophet, your Lord knows that you are standing vigil in the nighttime for 2/3 of the night, or sometimes half of the night, or sometimes 1/3 of the night. So your Lord is acknowledging of the fact that you're engaging in this activity. You were given a program, you're engaging in it. Allah is aware of that. And beyond the fact that you are doing it, وَطَائِفَةٌ مِنَ الَّذِينَ مَعَكَ. Also, there's a group of those who accompany you in this practice. And that was a point that I was making earlier. These kind of programs, instructions are not reserved just for a person like the Prophet. The Prophet requires a support system around him that allows this kind of message to gain momentum. No one individual can be the solution to the problems that we have and the needs that must be satisfied. If we put our stock into a single person, single thing, single initiative, single building, single location geography, those will never be enough. So there has to be طَائِفَةٌ مِّنَ الَّذِينَ مَعَكَ. وَاللَّهُ يُقَدِّرُ اللَّيْلَ وَالنَّهَارَ. And Allah is the one who measures the day and the night. عَلِمَ أَن لَن تُحْصُوهُ فَتَابَ عَلَيْكُمْ. Allah knows that you cannot fully calculate the duration of the night. So God is lenient towards you in the issue. So when Allah says, قُمِ اللَّيْلَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا نِصْفَهُ أَوْ انْقُصْ مِنْهُ قَلِيلًا أَوْ زِدْ عَلَيْهِ. Saying, well, when does the night start and when does the night end? They say this is a very, it's a trivial issue because now we know when the nighttime is. But the larger point is what? In the instructions that you're given to be done, we know that sometimes you may not fully understand. You may not precisely know how it should be practiced, right? In the pursuit of justice, in the pursuit of establishing brotherhood and sisterhood. You're given general instructions, you may not fully know in every scenario what to do. وَاللَّهُ يُقَدِّرُ اللَّيْلَ. It is Allah that kind of measures the night and the day. It is Allah that is giving dictations of how these should be practiced. عَلِمَ أَن لَن تُحْصُوهُ فَتَابَ عَلَيْكُمْ. It is not for us to always perfectly kind of practice what Allah intended or what Allah has shared with us with His intention. Now, it's not to say that the attempt is the most important thing and what happens afterwards is unimportant. That's not what's being said, but this idea of either it needs to be done perfectly or it's in vain and it's not helpful, that's not true. It's telling the Prophet and the people around him that in this process of building yourselves, there's not only flexibility in how much time you spend in doing that, but beyond that, we know there's not going to be a level of precision there, and we don't expect that from you. So in one way, it's to say, don't be too hard on yourself. take the core of what's being said and try to the best of your ability to practice that. Right? And don't let sometimes the peculiarities, those specific details, serve as a means of kind of destroying the ability to do the core, the essence. Sometimes we get so lost in the specifics that we miss the larger point. فَقْرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ. So recite as much of the Quran as is feasible for you. Again, not only is God lenient towards you and kind of figuring out how much time you should spend to do it, whatever is sustainable for you, whatever is manageable for you, whatever is feasible for you, engage with the recitation of the Quran in that way. So remember, it says قُمِ اللَّيْلَ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا, and it says وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا. Against these two things, there is an incredible amount of flexibility here. Why? Because Allah knows there's going to be good days and bad. There's going to be times where we're fully motivated and we're not. So whatever is feasible for you, use that at that moment to kind of make those advancements. And there's a lot of kind of examples that ulama give and from the Ahlul Bayt that says, like we mentioned, I think in passing last night, when your heart, when your spirit, when your soul is ready, take advantage of it to make these advancements. There's a writing that Imam Ali alayhi salatu has with one of the famous companions, Harith al-Harith al-Hamidani, famous companion of the Imam, special companion. He's in some accounts kind of mentioned as one of the 10 close companions of the Imam, 10 trusted companions of the Imam himself. And he was kind of one of the earliest people to give allegiance to the Imam in Medina, and he had such an intense love for the Imam. There's a famous riwayah that the Imam shared with him, "O Harith, whoever loves me, in their moment of death, they shall see me in that way, in the kind of the way that there's love. And whoever is my enemy shall see me at their time of death in a way that they despise." And there's a very famous kind of poem that was recited on the back of this riwayah by the famous poet Sayyid Himyari on this. Anyway, he tells Harith Hamidani, "خَادِعْ نَفْسَكَ فِي الْعِبَادَةِ." Dupe your nafs into obedience. وَارْفُقْ بِهَا وَلَا تَقْهَرْهَا. It says, be affable, be companionable, but don't force your nafs into worship. وَخُذْ عَفْوَهَا وَنَشَاطَهَا. It says, utilize its free time and also its good mood to perform those things. إِلَّا مَا كَانَ مَكْتُوبًا عَلَيْكَ مِنَ الْفَرِيضَةِ. Unless it's a kind of a mandatory action that you've been prescribed, فَإِنَّهَا لَابُدَّ مِنْ قَضَائِهَا وَتَعَهُدَهَا عَنْ مَحَلِّهِ. Those you have to do kind of like in the way that you're supposed to do it and at the time you're supposed to do it. But beyond that, anything extra, use the time that you have free and kind of like the good mood that you have to advance that. فَقْرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ. Because you're going to recite it in tartil, do whatever is feasible for you in this stage, and you will build capacity over time. عَلِمَ أَنْ سَيَكُونُ مِنْكُمْ مَرْضَى وَآخَرُونَ يَضْرِبُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ يَبْتَغُونَ مِنْ فَضْلِ اللَّهِ وَآخَرُونَ يَقَاتِلُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Allah is saying that beyond the ability that we want to make flexible for you, we know that some of you will be sick, some of you will be traveling, some of you will be fighting in the way of God. So the situations that you're in will change. Because of that, we want you to feel the flexibility to be able to do what is feasible for you in those moments. Certain time period, you're really overwhelmed. Maintain your ability to engage with the Quran, but you can adjust it in a way that you don't feel fully overwhelmed. That's okay. And the community at large can have these ebbs and flows too. There'll be certain times where the situation is right. You should push to make those advancements. You should not say, well, we only want to do one thing a year or two things a year. No, there's an opportunity. Push forward. There are certain times where you're restricted. Okay, you cannot do much, very little. That's okay. فَقْرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنْهُ. Again, the ayah repeats. So recite as much as feasible for you. وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ. And maintain, establish the prayer. وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةِ. And pay the charity. وَأَقْرِضُوا اللَّهَ قَرْضًا حَسَنًا. And give to Allah a good loan. Lend to Allah a good loan. وَمَا تُقَدِّمُوا لِأَنفُسِكُم مِّنْ خَيْرٍ تَجِدُوهُ عِندَ اللَّهِ. Whatever you send forward to God, of your good actions, you shall find them with God. هُوَ خَيْرًا وَأَعْدَمُ أَجْرًا. You will find them not only in a better state, but also with higher reward. وَاسْتَغْفِرُ اللَّهِ. And repent to God, ask God for forgiveness. إِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ Rahim. Indeed, Allah is all forgiving, all merciful. So I'll end here because not only have we gone over time, but again, there's so much I feel that is can be kind of derived from this surah that speaks to our challenges in developing community and kind of growing community. And it's important for us to kind of take example from these surahs that we have that are instructing the community in those early stages too. What are those parallels? There's so many parallels for us to identify them, put them kind of into our consciousness, our radar, when we are also engaging in these types of activities, and know what is the right way and what is the wrong way, right? We may think we have to be totally uncompromising. We have to do this like dua, we have to do this program, we have whatever. فَقْرَأُوا مَا تَيَسَّرَ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ. Whatever is feasible for you, do that. So having that flexibility is, of course, an important part of maintaining that spiritual program and also being able to build capacity, inshallah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be of those, as the last ayah says, إِنَّ رَبَّكَ يَعْلَمُ أَنَّكَ تَقُومُ أَدْنَى مِنْ ثُلُثِ اللَّيْلِ وَنِصْفَهُ وَثُلُثَهُ وَطَائِفَةٌ مِنَ الَّذِينَ مَعَكَ. Inshallah, we can be among the ta'ifa that are also accompanying the Prophet, the Ahlul Bayt. Peace and blessings be upon him, and all the practicing mu'mineen, mu'minat in these instructions. We may also, inshallah, accompany them in our journeys too, inshallah. Let us take our hearts to Medina and accompany Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salatu wassalam on a night like this, where he has to prepare himself and prepare the family with the difficulty of the departure of Lady Fatima salamullah alayha. It's narrated from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salatu wassalam that when Lady Fatima salamullah alayha was inflicted with her illness, the women of the Muhajirin and the women of the Ansar gathered around her, and they began kind of asking her questions, checking in on her. And they said, "How are you doing, O daughter of the Messenger of Allah?" Lady Fatima says, "By Allah, I began to have feelings of resentment for your world. I am beginning to detest your men. I have cast them away after testing them. After examining them, I have distaste and hatred for them. Shameful is the defiling of honor, to be deceitful or playful after having been serious, to strike the soft rocks, to slacken the spears, the foolishness of judgments and the misguidance of wants." Lady Fatima is saying that after all that you experienced during the lifetime of my father, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what has caused you to turn now on your heels? And with all of that, Lady Fatima asks them, مَا الَّذِي نَقَمُوا مِنْ أَبِي الْحَسَنِ. Why were they so hostile to Abu al-Hasan? What crime did Abu al-Hasan commit, Imam Ali alayhi salatu wasalam commit, that they had to act with him this way? نَقَمُوا وَاللَّهِ مِنْهُ شِدَّةَ وَطْأَتِهِ وَنَكَالَ وَقْعَتِهِ. They took vengeance by Allah from him for his unbiased sword, his carelessness about death, وَنَكِيلِ سَيْفِهِ وَتَبَحُرِهِ فِي كِتَابِ اللَّهِ, his unprecedented courage, his deadly assaults, his severe encounters, وَتَنَمُّرَهُ فِي ذَاتِ اللَّهِ, his anger for the sole sake of God, exalted is his name. It is with these feelings that Lady Fatima departs this world. She departs knowing not only of the pain that her children will experience as she goes, but beyond that, she's also thinking of Imam Ali alayhi salam. At least I was here to accompany Ali in these few days after the death of the Prophet. But what shall Ali feel after I leave in just a few days? Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salatu wasalam, when he buries the body of Lady Fatima, he begins to address the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. يا رسول الله عني وعن ابنتك النازلة في جوارك والسريعة اللحاق بك. O Prophet, peace be upon me, peace be upon you from me and also from your daughter who has come to you, who had hastened to meet you. قال يا رسول الله عن صفيتك صبري. My patience about your chosen daughter had been exhausted. ورق عنها تجلدي. And my power of endurance had weakened, يا رسول الله. أن لي في تأسي بعدم فرقتك وفاضح مصيبتك. Except that I have ground for consolation in having endured the great hardship and heart-rending affair of your separation. As I laid you down, Ya Rasulullah, in your grave when you breathed your last breath, when your head was between my neck and chest, you stated, verily we are from Allah and to Allah we shall return. فَلَقَدْ اسْتُرْجِعْتُ الْوَدِيعَ Ya Rasulullah, the trust that has been given to me has now been returned. وَأُخَذَتِ الرَّهِينَ, and what has been given has been taken back. أَمَّا حُزْنِي فَسَرْمَتْ, as to my grief, it shall know no bounds. Who shall be there to accompany Ali in his pains? Ali has no conversation partner anymore. He shall go out and converse with the wells in solitude. وَأَمَّا لَيْلِي فَمُسَهَّدْ, as for my nights, they will remain sleepless. إِلَىٰ أَن يَخْتَارَ اللَّهُ لِي دَارَكَ الَّتِي أَنْتَ بِهَا مُقِيمٌ, until Allah chooses for me a house in which you are now residing. Ya Rasulallah, certainly your daughter will apprise you of the joining together of your nation for the aim of oppressing her. Ask for her, Ya Rasulullah, the details. She shall share with you everything that happened. This had happened only a short time after you had left us, yet your remembrance had disappeared all too soon. My salams to you both, the salam of a grief-stricken one. If I go away, Ya Rasulallah, Ya Fatima, from your grave, it is not because I'm wary of you, and if I stay, it is not due to the lack of belief that I have in what Allah has promised and what those who shall endure. It is in these difficult moments that Imam Ali alayhi salatu wassalam has to bid these farewells to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, and to Lady Fatima to return the trust that he had been entrusted with. But how does Zainab have to speak when she turns to Medina in speaking to the returning of the trust of her beloved Abu Abdullah? Those difficult moments where Zainab had to see the butchered body of Abu Abdullah on the plains of Karbala, turning to her mother, turning to her father, and having to share the news, the report of what had happened. Ya Fatima, you can see what has happened to your beloved Abu Abdullah. It is difficult for me to say what has happened to my beloved brother. This is the tragedies of Ahlul Bayt. It is not just one or two, one after the other. They have to experience these tragedies. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين أي منقلب ينقلبون. اللهم إنا نسألك وندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم. إلهي بحق فاطمة وأبيها وبعلها وبنيها والسر المستودع فيها بعدد ما أحاط به علمك. يا الله 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 يا رحمن يا رحيم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك واكفنا يا قاضي الحاجات ويا كافي المهمات إنك مجيب الدعوات إنك على كل شيء قدير. Allah, we ask you by the right of this night to hasten the appearance of our Imam. Ya Allah, we ask you by the right of this night to bless, to elevate the rank of all of those who have passed from our loved ones and all mu'mineen and mu'minat. Ya Allah, we ask you to give a quick recovery and a full recovery to all of those who are struggling in this world and who are ill. Ya Allah, we ask you to bring victory and success to all of the oppressed in the world against their oppressors. Ya Allah, we ask you to protect us and to protect our families, to make us of those who continue to fight in the way to gain your pleasure, Ya Allah. Allah, we ask you to preserve and protect all of those who serve your cause, all of those who are struggling to maintain their spiritual programs to then serve your cause. Ya Allah, we ask you finally to preserve our community, to protect us, to bring our hearts closer together, allow us to become united in serving your cause, inshallah, and to create communities and families that serve your will and that you are pleased with, inshallah. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Salatu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin.
متوجه زيارات. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين وابن سيد الوصيين. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء. السلام عليك يا علي بن موسى الرضا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك ظهورك. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على محمد